Hi, my name is Pastor Hal York, and welcome to Truth in the Trenches. Today we find ourselves back in James, this time chapter 1, verse 6. But he must ask in faith without any doubting, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Last time we looked at verse 5, if any of you lack wisdom or need wisdom, let him ask of God, and let him come boldly to the throne of grace to find help in their time of need, and we all need to do that. And the context here is the trials that these people are going through. The world has no answers for trials. Their advice is avoid as much pain as you can, and if pain comes, well, deal with it. But it's pursue pleasure, because pain is always bad. But James is giving us much greater counsel than that, better counsel than that. He says, when trials come, and if you lack wisdom, ask God. God gives wisdom generously. And this command is a necessary part of the believer's life. God intends these trials will drive believers to a greater dependency on Him by showing them their own inadequacy. As with all His riches, God has wisdom in abundance. It's available for those who seek it. Proverbs 2, 1-8 reminds us of that. So James follows up verse 5 with some guidelines and warnings as to the attitude we should have when we ask. He says in verse 6, ask in faith. He must ask in faith. Prayer must be offered with confident trust in a sovereign God. We don't ask in bitterness. It's not masked anger. It's not a complaint against God. It must not be asked with a doubting heart. We must ask in faith. And God does not promise us a clear-cut explanation for every trial in our lives, but He does promise to hear our prayers. He does promise to meet us there. And we are to ask in faith, knowing God is sovereign. God is in control. He has a purpose. They have come for a purpose. They've come. And so we come in faith, believing God is working all things together for our good. As last time we looked at the book of Job, and I think Job illustrates this principle perfectly. There will not always be answers for the trials, at least answers that we think we deserve or need. Because Job certainly never got any, other than the fact and reality that God was God. Good is not always health. We know God says all things work together for our good. And so we ask believing that. But good is not always health, wealth, and prosperity. But for sure we can say it is for godliness, Christ-likeness. There may be other reasons, as we mentioned last time, but for sure the trials are meant to produce the peaceable fruit of righteousness and Christ-likeness in our life. So he says, let him ask of God, ask in faith without any doubting or wavering. And this refers to having one's thinking divided within us, not merely because of mental indecision, but an inner conflict. Maybe you're thinking in their life, I don't deserve this. I don't like what's happening. And we start to distrust God. How did we come to God? Why are we asking for wisdom from God pertaining to our trials? It matters. One who occasionally believes in God but fails to trust Him when trials come is the doubting person. It's the person he describes as wavering or unstable, tossed by winds and waves. He's called the double-minded or Mr. Looking Both Ways in Pilgrim's Progress. Elijah came near the people in 1 Kings and said, how long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him a word. And there's so many people today in churches and professing to know the Lord who are living here. They're limping between two different opinions. They don't know which way to go. They don't know which way to turn. When trials come, they don't know how to think about them. They don't know how to deal with them. They don't know who to believe. They're limping between two opinions. They're trying to make up their mind who to follow. They're listening to both sides. They're trying to decide which one is best, which one makes the most sense to them. And James describes this person as unstable. He's tossed all over the place by every wind of doctrine. There's no sure foundation. And this is where many people, even believers, live. Sometimes in our trials we can find ourselves here because trials always reveal our theology, what we really believe about God. Remember the story of Mark 4? We've talked about it before. Jesus tells his disciples, let's go to the other side, and Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray. And the disciples are in the boat. Actually, this one, Jesus is in the boat with them, but he's in the boat sleeping. And he said, let's go to the other side. So they get out, start rowing across the lake, and this terrible storm comes up, and they start to take on water. And they wake Jesus up, and he says, and they say to Jesus, do you not care that we are perishing? Well, in reality, neither one was true. But they could not reconcile Jesus telling them to go to the other side of the lake with a storm. It should be smooth sailing, right? Shouldn't it always be smooth sailing? We know God's will. We know what he wants us to do, so it shouldn't just be a straight line. There should be no troubles. There should be no trials. But the reality is Jesus did care. They weren't going to perish. The first verse of the next chapter says, when they reached the other side. Our trials reveal our theology. And their theology was wrong. Jesus did care. And they were not going to die. And that's why Paul warns us in Colossians, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. And the world has a lot of philosophies about trials, about difficulties that they want to impart to the Christian. And there's many quote Christian philosophies about trials that are just worldly wisdom wrapped in biblical verbiage. The world has no end to philosophies how to deal with trials. Why do trials come? Even many in the church answer this way. They always come from Satan. Or else they are always because of sin. I remember a lovely woman, she was a dear woman, she was an older woman, her husband had cancer. She was an older lady, but she looked at me one day, I was over to see her, and she said something that sort of took me by surprise. She says, we know God had nothing to do with this. That's what she'd be learning. That's what she'd been learning at her church. Well, who's sovereign in her mind? Well, certainly not God. As Job teaches us, no one touches God's children without God's permission. But in her mind, she believed in a dualistic universe where there was two gods warring against each other. And when bad things happen, Satan is winning. When good things happen, God is winning. And the reality is the Bible knows nothing of this kind of thinking. You have one foot in the world and its philosophies and one foot in the church. And that person is unstable in all their ways. I'm going to check them out, decide which one I want to believe, which one I want to follow. James says, for that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord. James verses 1:7. God does not give wisdom so we can decide if we agree with it or want to obey it. God may not give us an answer that satisfies all our questions. We may never have this side of heaven the whys that satisfy us, but our faith is not in answers. It's in God. That God is working all things together for our good. God has a reason. And he's under no obligation to tell us that reason. But we do know this, God is in control and is all wise and is all loving and is working in us for his good and for his glory, rather, and for our good. So when various trials come, do not be angry, count it all joy. Do not be confused, but let him ask God for wisdom, not doubting. Do not be double-minded, but believe God is faithful. And when trials come, may Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 be our verse that we can stand on. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding that Jesus doesn't care or that we're going to perish. No, that's our understanding. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean or trust in your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. May this truth guide us and guard us in the trenches of life as we seek to live our lives for the glory of God and the good of others. May God bless.